So the title of the message today is Provisions for Egypt and Israel. And actually, let me change it. Provisions for Egypt, Canaan, and Israel. That's more accurate. Before we dive in here, this chapter really demonstrates the continued care that Joseph took for his family. You see that all the way through. The wisdom that he had in storing up these vast stores of grain, and even the good provisions that he made for the people of Egypt throughout these years. Remember, there were five when Joseph's brothers come at the time of these first part of Genesis 47. We'll see Joseph had said prior that there were still 5 years left of the famine, and so for the remaining 5 years is kind of what we're seeing in the rest of Genesis 47 is what happened during those 5 years and how were things managed and how did things turn out. That's what we're considering. There's basically a period of 5 years. We're not told it's exactly 5 years, but we're told what happened during the rest of the famine. And so we already know is a period of 5 years. Now, also, this chapter, I think, explains a lot about how the people of Israel came to prosper in Egypt, and later how they came to so easily be made slaves and how they became so easily mistreated and hated and despised. I think a lot of that you see set in motion here. And so I want to draw your attention to that because I think it's very helpful. It explains a lot of what happens in the early chapters of Exodus. Also, another thing to say about this chapter, there are some remarkable scenes. I'm going to outline this chapter for you in a moment, but before I do, in every section of the outline, there's some amazing scene. It's really kind of an incredible chapter in that way. Let me just point out 4 of them. First, we see some of these brothers of Joseph come in and start fumbling their speech before Pharaoh, make some real political missteps, but still finding Pharaoh's favor. It's kind of amazing that it happens that way. So that's remarkable, that you could go into the courtroom of the greatest, most powerful man in the world and really screw up all the things you're supposed to do and still come out just fine. It's like that should not have gone that way, but it did. And so that's one thing. Then second, we see another remarkable thing with Pharaoh. We see this old foreigner named Jacob be brought into the palace court of the most powerful man in the world and speak frankly and directly to him and assume in his posture or in their relationship one to another a superior place to this king. And the powerful king acknowledges the rightness of this and welcomes whatever blessings the old man might give him. That's remarkable. How many times do you think in Pharaoh's life he likely sought a blessing from someone else? He was the one, the whole kingdom, the whole world was coming to him for help. And he comes and is blessed by this old man who can barely stand. Third amazing scene. The Egyptians eventually sell everything they own, even themselves, in order to get food, and they seem to do this gladly and with thankfulness. Genuine thanksgiving. It's remarkable that happens. If you were to look at the verse is I've got it. Verse 25. You have saved our lives. May it please my Lord. We will be servants to Pharaoh. I mean, that seems to be the consensus of the people. Of course, you saved our very lives. We'll do whatever. And that's at the end of having sold everything and even themselves as slaves or as servants. So it's a remarkable thing. Then the last, I think, amazing scene that we see is Jacob asking Joseph to swear an oath to him to return his body to Egypt after he dies and to bury him in the ancestral tomb of the family back in Canaan. It's just a remarkable scene as it plays out. There are also aside from those four scenes, which are really remarkable in their own right, there also is a statement made by Jacob in this chapter that I think ought to really make us stop and consider what we read. Jacob's words to Pharaoh when he sums up his life in such painful terms, I think, on one hand are expected, on the other hand are shocking. And so we'll consider that a little bit. So I would say we shouldn't read them hastily, and we should really ponder what he says. As far as an outline of the chapter, in the first 6 verses, Joseph's brothers meet Pharaoh. And then in verses 7 through 10, and these are probably, for the most part, paragraph breaks in your Bible. Verses 7 through 10, Joseph's father meets Pharaoh. And I word it that way because that's the only reason he got audience, because he was Joseph's father, not because he was Jacob. So Joseph's brothers meet Pharaoh in verses 1 through 6. Then Joseph's father meets Pharaoh in verses 7 through 10. And then in verses 11 through 26, we see Joseph providing for his family and Egypt and Canaan. 11 through 26. Verse 27 is kind of its own thing, but I'm going to lump it with the rest of the chapter. Verses 27 through 31, Jacob prepares to die by fixing his descendants' gaze upon Canaan and not upon Egypt. Things are really good. They've never had it so good as they do right now in Egypt. But he wants to remember Canaan, and he wants his descendants to be thinking about Canaan and not Egypt. And so those are the 4 sections as I've outlined it. So with that, I'd like to just dive in and begin this first section. Joseph's brothers meet Pharaoh, verses 1 through 6. We will read the text, the chapter, a section at a time. So let's read these first 6 verses. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." All right, that's as far as we're going to go for that section. So Joseph now comes and enacts the plan that he revealed in the last chapter to his brothers. You remember it kind of closed that way, that he was saying, this is how it's going to go. I'm going to go present you to Pharaoh, and I'm going to tell him these things, and he's probably going to ask you, what is your occupation? And you are going to say, okay, don't miss it, chapter 46, verses 33 and 34. You shall say, quote, "Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers." Stop and close your mouth and don't say any more. And this is what they say. And then it says, "and they said," and it goes on, and it's like, no. So they really overstep the counsel they were given. So we'll see that in a minute as we kind of work through the text. But so this is the plan. Joseph goes and does his part, and it's very, there's a certain decorum to the way things are supposed to happen, and he's been here for a lot of years now, and he understands that he's been here at least 9 years now, because 7 years of plenty, and then now the 7 years of famine. They're 2 years in to that, so at least for 9 years now, he's been in Pharaoh's palace. And before that, even the people that he served, remember when it was Potiphar, this was the captain of Pharaoh's guard, and he was directly involved in some ways with Pharaoh, even though he didn't personally know him. He was in service of the palace, so he was around kind of the way the Egyptians did things. Then when he was in prison, it was still Pharaoh's main prison. And he even then rubbed shoulders with people who had served in the palace. He was very familiar with these sorts of things. And now he comes time to present his brothers, and he knows how it should happen. If it's going to work out well, it needs to be in this way. We don't want to cause offense unnecessarily. We want to follow all the proper procedures. And, it's if you've ever seen, HBO did a special, a whole long series on John Adams. And there's one of the episodes where John Adams has to go then and speak to the King of England. And it's like all these things he's supposed to do. He's not to look at him. He's not to, he's supposed to bow a certain number of times, step away in a certain pattern, and all these things. And he does all those things. And it's like, as the scene is shot, it's like you sense that the whole relationship between these two countries is on a knife's edge. And if he were just to say the wrong thing in the wrong way, it would all be over. That's how it feels. And it's amazing. And actually, at least the way they portray it really kind of was that way. So this is kind of the way it is. Yes, this Pharaoh loves Joseph and wants to, it's fine to honor his family as a favor to Joseph, but that doesn't mean you go in and you just offend him. You still have to mind your P's and Q's and do all the right things, or it's just not going to go well. Could go exactly the opposite. So in order for this to work, they're going to need the continued grace of God in order to ensure the continued favor of Pharaoh. And so first comes this timely announcement to Pharaoh concerning his brothers. Hey, they're here. Then there is a selection made of 5 of the 11 brothers of Joseph. Isn't this curious? He chooses 5. Are you curious who he chose? Well, I can tell you. I can tell you I don't know who he chose. That's all I can tell you. I don't know either. Nobody knows. Moses may not have known. Obviously, it doesn't matter. It's not important. Because it's not said, I can tell you this. Evidently, it was not a display of favoritism. That was long done. It was not about settling scores and excluding certain ones or choosing his favorites. He just chose 5. I don't know why 5. We could ask, though, why a smaller representative group instead of all of them? Well, that seems a little more clear. Maybe you could say, we could venture a guess. It's not a field trip. It's not a sightseeing tour. It was an important meeting with much at stake. Pharaoh's going to want to meet some of the brothers. Does he need to meet them all? I don't know. Would 12 seem like too much of an intrusion? Maybe bring 3, but I don't know. He brought 5. I don't know why 5. Maybe it was custom. Some large group comes and visits the land, and they're summoned before Pharaoh. Maybe he says no more than 5. Maybe it's a standing tradition. I don't know. We're not told. It doesn't matter. Just 5 came. Moses doesn't care to tell us which 5. Joseph doesn't go out of his way to nothing's mentioned about why he chose those 5. Just he chose 5. He selected 5 to represent the whole. The conversation begins to go just as Joseph counseled them that it would. They are asked about their occupation, and they respond accordingly. Right? We read, verse 3, Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." Great. Now, the reason they were to do that and say that was so that, verse 34 of chapter 46, go back to chapter 46 at the end. "You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers." Why say that? "In order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians." So he's going to hear that you're shepherds, and he's already going to kind of be revolted and not want you around. They don't view that as an esteemed job, right? There's nothing wrong with the people that are shepherds. It's like today, what would the position be? I don't know if people talk about like a trash collector. Like nothing wrong with being a trash collector. But it's kind of just viewed as like, well, you're handling the stuff that we think is kind of just gross. We don't want to be associated with that, right? Or if your job, you work for the city and you clean out sewers, you think, oh, I don't want your job. It's that sort of a thing. Nothing wrong with the job. But for the Egyptians, it's definitely frowned upon. It's an abomination, and they don't eat with those people. And so that's what you're to do. Tell them that. and then he'll let you dwell in the land of Goshen, because that's the best land for pasturing and for the flocks and stuff in Egypt. And he won't insist that you live with him or live near him or send you somewhere else, because the Egyptian society is not going to want you. So they come in and they talk about themselves being shepherds, so there's a knock against them. And then they have the gall to say to Pharaoh, look, we just came here. We don't really want to live here. We're just kind of passing through temporarily. We're not coming to join your society. I know you have what all the world needs, but we're just here for food. We're not here for your culture. We're not here for your blessing. We're not here for anything. We're just a passing through. And we'd appreciate it, by the way, while we're passing through, if you'd give us the best land. Let me just suggest to you how you might treat us. Perhaps the greatest land in all your country, maybe you could give it to us for as long as we need it. What do you think? It's incredible. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there's no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. It's so ridiculous to just be so forward. You can imagine Joseph just like, just behind, just cut it out, and they're, and then some servant on the other side of them thinks, oh, off with their head for talking this way. It's like, no. That's not what I meant. It's this kind of a thing. They're inviting problems, right? And Pharaoh, amazingly, just accepts it. He overlooks all of that. His love for Joseph is so much, it's okay. He doesn't even mention it. It's amazing. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, he doesn't say to them, but he speaks to Joseph. Maybe they were put out for their rudeness, and he tells, all right, Joseph, look, these country bumpkins are yours, these relatives, I don't know. They definitely belong in Goshen, I can tell you that. It's that kind of a thing. They don't belong in the palace. So he says to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. If any of them are capable men, give them a job. Put them in charge. Not let them, be shepherds of my life. Put them in charge of my livestock. We are not told explicitly, any point from here on, that they were given that role. But I think we're meant to understand that they were given that task. That assumption, I'll say, does factor in some to the picture I'm going to paint for you about how all these things take place and their fortunes change in Egypt. I think we're meant to understand it. Why else would we be given that sentence? Why would Moses give us that unless it actually happened, that they actually did end up in that position? Because otherwise, if they didn't, it's kind of like Joseph saying, yeah, they're a bunch of idiots, all of them. They're totally incapable and inept. There's not one of them that would be that way. The other thing that's important about this is the fact that Pharaoh offers this, I think is telling, and I think it kind of indicates again perhaps a change in the brothers. In that before, remember, Joseph was sold into slavery because he was out after his brothers who were not faithfully acting as shepherds. His father couldn't trust them to carry out his will with the livestock. But now at the situation, some 22 years later, they come back and Pharaoh says, hey, if any of them are able, put them in charge of my livestock. It's kind of like, oh, are you sure you want to trust those guys? But I think it indicates that they've really changed. And again, admittedly, Moses is silent directly about whether they did these things, but whether they filled that role. But I will indicate to you, I believe that in verse 27 of this chapter, it says, thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful, and multiplied greatly. That the first word in that sentence, thus, in this way, these things having taken place, then the result was they prospered. I think the only way to explain their prospering is that they were, in fact, they did take these positions. That's part of the picture. This was offered to them, and they took those jobs. Now, what else can we say about that? These words from Pharaoh are, in a sense, wonderful news, but there's this twist at the end in verse 6 that I think was maybe not anticipated by Joseph. It seems to have been a real surprise. I say that because he just talked to his brothers. He said, okay, we're going to go in. I'm going to introduce you. He's going to ask your occupation. You say this. Hopefully, things work out. He'll let us have the land of Goshen to live in. He didn't say, and then when he offers you a job, specifically to put you in charge of all these things, then you should say yes or no, or he doesn't talk about that. So I don't think it was necessarily anticipated by Joseph, but it happens nonetheless. More than that, in these words, the family of Israel is put into officially the service of Pharaoh. Think of that. They were sojourners just a passing through. We'd happy if you'd give us some land, and now they're in his service. They work for Pharaoh from day one. That's amazing. It's an honored position, but they are conscripted into Pharaoh's service already. Pharaoh's fond of them. He loves their brother. They are honored because of Joseph, but they are, in fact, already servants of Pharaoh. By placing the men in Pharaoh's service as chief royal stockmen, their responsibilities also kind of became conflicted in their days. They continued to prosper in Egypt, but they had responsibility for Pharaoh's flock as well. And we'll see that this will become an increasingly larger and larger responsibility. Now, they don't bear it alone for sure. They're not the ones out there in the fields, but they are in charge of making sure that all of Pharaoh's livestock are well attended and cared for. They bear responsibility to Pharaoh. They're in his service. These sorts of arrangements are the kinds of things that change over time. From one king to another, things get assumed, opinions and feelings change. So it's risky. In this one statement, I think, was planted the seed that grew from service to slavery, from honored oversight to despised labor. Here, the legal mechanism was put in place to make that change. In the rest of the chapter, we'll see the stage is set for what will become a real distaste for the Israelites in the hearts of the Egyptians. You don't see in this chapter them really dislike the Israelites, but you see how things come about that you could imagine that this wouldn't last long and they would dislike the Israelites. And I'll explain more of that as we go on. So, thus far, the brothers have, 5 of the brothers have met Pharaoh. You think of this, it's very possible that the other 6 brothers never laid eyes on Pharaoh in their life. Isn't it amazing? I mean, it's very possible that they never would have met him, that just these 5 only. It's hard to say. Now, verses 7 through 10, let's consider Joseph's father meets Pharaoh. Then Joseph brought into Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Again, as I said already, this is an amazing scene. On the one hand, we are twice told that Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Scholars differ on this a little bit, but I'm of the opinion that such a blessing happened twice, that it happened at the beginning and at the end. Now, by blessing, we likely, I mean at least, that he twice prayed to God for the good of Pharaoh and his kingdom. Something like, "May the Lord God bless you," and talk and those sorts of things, something like this. Perhaps with his hands upon him, perhaps not. Once he did this at the beginning, and then they had this brief exchange, and then he did it again. He would have done this in a posture of being of the superior over the inferior. We read that clearly in Hebrews, but it's evident as we go through these narratives in Scripture that it is always the superior one who is blessing the inferior. At the very least, it's someone might pronounce a blessing in the name of someone who's superior over that person's inferior. It's always, at least as an agent, over a superior person. It kind of always appears at least that way. I think that's likely the way that Jacob sees it here. I think Pharaoh views Jacob, wants to honor Jacob as superior to him, Jacob himself. So this honor from Pharaoh toward Jacob, I think, comes in two ways, or for two reasons. First, due to the nature of Jacob's son, Joseph's service and the wisdom, and what was seen as an effective connection to God, right? And Pharaoh himself said, this guy, God speaks to this guy. This guy has the wisdom of God. We're going to put him in charge. And he does. And so these things happen in this way. Pharaoh can't turn everything over to Joseph without in some way acknowledging Joseph's God. And so now Joseph's father has come. And because of Joseph's immense wisdom, his connection to God, or to what Pharaoh might see as not just the God, but the gods, something that way, and the excellent service that his son has rendered him, he wants to give him audience in the courtroom, and appear before him and thank him and honor him for having raised such a son as this, right? That's one way the honor comes. Second was his old age and the long-standing notions that wisdom belongs to those with gray hair, right? To the gray head, to the aged. This is a man who is old. You've never met a man this old. You probably never will meet a man this old at this time. And he lived another 17 years, but he was at this time 130, right? That's a long time to live. And so this 130-year-old man comes in, and notice what it says in verse 7. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father. Remember, he came all this way on a cart, in a wagon. But now he comes in, or a chariot, whatever it may have been. He comes in now, and Joseph brings Jacob in, and then it says, stood him before Pharaoh. Now, if it was a young man, it would be a little bit strange to say, and he came and stood him before you, and you would think maybe it just meant he directed you to stand in a certain spot. But I think with this old man, who we already know had trouble making a journey, it's very possible you literally kind of you held his arm up while he was standing there. You stood him up before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. What a thing. So this old age and the way his son had blessed Pharaoh in Egypt all got him these honors. We know his old age factored largely in the honor he was given because it's the only question Pharaoh asked of them. I mean, think of this. It's like you go to this man and he just says, how old are you? That's the question. Now, he doesn't ask it that way, right? If he were to say, how old are you? That's pretty rude. But to honor the man, he says it in this kind of official way. How many are the days of your life? He's not asking him, like in our culture, it's like, how old are you is like, how irrelevant are you almost. In this culture, how old are you is, how relevant are you? How much honor do you deserve? How much wisdom have you gained? How many things have you experienced and can speak to wisely? Tell me, how many are the days of the years of your life? It feels so different in a different culture to ask that question. And we should see it as an honor. But it's amazing that that's the one thing Pharaoh says. I mean, maybe they had some other discussions, well, your son here sure has been a blessing to me. I mean, something like that probably is said, but it's not recorded for us. What we're told is there was one exchange. Pharaoh wanted to know how honored the gods had made Jacob. How many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob responds very frankly. He describes the years of his life in different language, and he explains something about what they've been like. Jacob said to Pharaoh, The days of the years of my sojourning. It's not my life, it's my sojourning. Don't just call it a life. The days of my wandering, my traveling about from place to place, my entire life, 130 years I've been moving about and not had a settled place. That's been my entire life. He says sojourning. Now later he says the years of my life. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. So it's amazing. How many, Pharaoh says, are the days of the years of your life? And he says, well, first of all, the days of the years of my sojourning have been 130 years. But you asked about my life. Few and evil have been the days of my life. It's like, few? Like Pharaoh probably doesn't know anyone this old. Maybe never has. Few and evil. So his life, he says, instead of life, he says sojourning. Remember Hebrews talks about men who speak in such a way, they talk as though they don't have a permanent home here. This maybe is one of those places. You know, like, well, I've been a sojourner all my life. I don't really have a home here. There's this promise. This God I just blessed you in His name of. Right? We're here to bless the world. And that's why I've blessed you. And my son has been a blessing to you. I'm just a sojourner here. I don't really have a life, a home, anything that I've made or built. We're sojourners. But the years of my life have been few, and they've been evil. And you think, well, how could they possibly have been few? Well, he qualifies it later. He says, they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning, right? They died 175 and 180. He ends up dying at 147, which is still ridiculous, but it's not, he's definitely not as old as they are. I mean, he's got 50 more years to go before he's as old as his father was when his father died, and 45 more years to go before he's as old as his grandfather Abraham was when he passed away. So he's a long ways off. And to be as frail as he is already, he can already see he's not really measuring up in terms of vitality to what those men had. Moreover, they've been evil. Now, Pharaoh doesn't ask him about that. You know, it's interesting. He says they've been few and evil, and he explains what he means by few, but he doesn't explain what he means by evil, and Pharaoh doesn't ask him to explain. I think the answer is he assumes. Pharaoh probably assumes it's the evil nature of his life, the hard nature of his life has been connected to the sojourning nature of his life, to the loss of Joseph for all these years. He's finally been reunited to him. To the famine, right? Those things. And that would be enough. I mean, if I had experienced all those things in my life, I think all of us would say, that's a rough life. But in reality, of course, there's even more. You know, of course, there's the favoritism he endured, his father loving his son, his brother Esau, even though God had chosen him, his father kind of sneaking off and trying to secretly bless Esau and not let anyone stop him. Then he's running for his life from his brother Esau. He gets to a land and he finds this woman to marry, and he's cheated, right? And his wages keep changing, and his whole family life then from then on is all a wreck because of the way he was cheated and all that had happened. They've had to endure all these years. Then he himself, he's got to run for his life when he leaves because Laban and his family is all after him. He gets to the promised land and he's trying to sneak in because he's still worried about Esau, and then God meets him and threatens him, right? These angels. And then he finally, okay, we'll deal with Esau. His life is spared. Esau tries to invite him away from the promised land. I can't do that. He stays there, but things are hard there. They find lots of enemies. His sons are making enemies, killing towns. They're traveling from place to place, just hoping to find a place to live. It's a mess. All those things aren't even mentioned. But it's been tough. Pharaoh wouldn't have known about those things. So there's a lot of reason for him to talk about his days of being few and evil. And yet he still understands that he's in a position, he's got blessing he can give to Pharaoh. It's amazing. It's such a juxtaposition of these two ideas. I've not lived long and my days have been very evil on the one hand, and you're the most powerful man in the world and you need to get a blessing from me. I've got something to give you. It's amazing. I just say, I think it indicates that Jacob is, at least now, in a real position of faith in God. That he would even deign to seek twice here to bless Pharaoh. It's his place to bring to Pharaoh more of what Joseph brought, that is, the blessing of God. So those 10 verses. It says, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. That's the end of that. Now verses 11 through 26, we read something quite different. Joseph provides for his family and for Egypt and for Canaan. So let's look at verse 11. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. This is interesting. So first he provides for them, right? So he gave them a permanent possession in the land of Goshen. Now we read, it says the land of Ramesses. And that is a later word. So that's a word from Moses' time, not from Joseph's time. Does that make sense? Ramesses wasn't, they didn't use that. That was called Goshen. But Moses now writes from the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Now, it's the very best of the land. Joseph provided for them also with food according to their numbers of dependents. So like a stipend from his storehouses. So Joseph has all these storehouses and he's in charge of all the food, and he just, for nothing, provides his family with whatever they need according to their dependents. How much do you need today? How much do you need this month? How much do you need this week? We'll have a regular delivery, set it up, right? You guys thought Amazon was good. Joseph was great, right? So here he goes. And, scheduled delivery all the time. And this is what he provides for them, according to the number of their dependents. That's quite a provision during a famine. You don't need to ever worry about food. And your livestock doesn't either. You're in the best of the land, and it's a famine, so things aren't great there, but whatever the land can produce, you guys have access to all of it. And then if whatever you're short, Joseph sends it on. No problem. This is this provision he makes. They have land. They're given land by Joseph. And they're given all this food. Now, verse 13. Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, don't miss this, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. Now, Joseph's brothers had come to Egypt initially because people in Canaan, the famine was getting bad enough that they were starting to need to go find grain, and they'd heard there was grain in Egypt. That has become so widespread a practice now to travel down to Egypt to get food. And the famine is so severe in Canaan that nobody in Canaan is left just living on the land there. They are all having to travel down to Egypt so frequently and in such need that we're told all the money of Canaan was now Joseph's. He gathered up all the money in Canaan, all the money in Egypt, in exchange for food. This is severe. It's the kind of famine that makes you forget about the years of plenty, just like Joseph said would happen. And so it's a frightening situation. So he gathered up all the money that was in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. What a servant of Pharaoh. I mean, Pharaoh was already the richest man around, but now all the money that the people had, he had. Just think of that for a moment. I mean, they're in a moment, here in a little while, they start trading away their livestock. But that's the way it is, right? I mean, something happens, some need your family meets, You first say, well, what money do we have? And you gather and you spend all the money. And then the money's spent. And then you start selling stuff. But guess what? Your neighbors don't have any money. There's just one guy that has any money. And quite frankly, you don't want money anyway. You need food. And only one guy's got food. Pharaoh and Joseph under him. So you got to go to Joseph. And what do you have? Well, I've got livestock. And this is how it goes. But both Egypt and Canaan are emptied of food by God and of money by Joseph. Verse 15. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. Now, we don't read any more about the Canaanites. I don't know if they stopped coming or if it's just no longer Moses' concern because he's concerned to talk about the dynamic of the situation as it continues to unfold in Egypt. That seems very likely. I can't imagine that all the Canaanites just stopped coming. But for some reason, Moses leaves them out of the rest of this. It's not his concern. Maybe they went elsewhere with their livestock, or maybe they weren't willing to go to that step. You know, I mean, to take that journey with all your livestock is kind of hard. Maybe they just eat the livestock and live as long as they can. Move on somewhere else or something. I don't know. But this is the situation. So we read that all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, what do they say? Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. Now think of that. We just kind of read over that and think, okay, they're out of money, now they want to do. Like, they're desperate. They come, they don't have any money, and they say, please give us more food. He's got storehouses of it. It's piled up. Right? Our government would say, you have to give it away. Well, they're the 1%ers. They have everything. Right? This is the way it is. Joseph doesn't just give it out. He doesn't look at them and they're needy and say, oh, okay. He's in service of Pharaoh. If Pharaoh had commanded him, of course he would. But Pharaoh hasn't commanded that. And it's not cruel. I mean, these people also heard. Why were these storehouses being built? And they were supposed to give a little bit of their food to Pharaoh because of this famine that was coming. Why didn't they save up? They didn't. But now they're in this place. They need what Pharaoh has. They've sold all their money. They've exchanged their money, rather. They don't sell their money. They've exchanged their money for food. They did sell it for food in a way, but anyway, they exchanged it. But their money's worthless now. Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. And Joseph answered, we'll give your livestock. And I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money's gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. Now, so all the livestock of the land, basically, and I don't think it means no one had a donkey left or anything like that, but just like the vast majority of all the livestock in the land was exchanged for food. Well, who's in charge of all the livestock? Joseph's brothers. This is crazy now. So now Joseph's in charge of all the grain and the food, and his brothers are in charge of all the livestock, and they live in the best of the land, and they themselves aren't taxed. They don't have to give anything to Pharaoh. They just get a ready supply. Everyone else has to keep buying stuff, but they are just living high on the hog. Prospering. Gaining many possessions, it says. Right? And they gained possessions in the land. How do they get all these possessions? Well, because they're the only flocks that are prospering. They got the best of the land. And people that tend to serve in palaces do pretty well. People in government always come out ahead, and they do too. Well, so he supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. Now, as cruel as this kind of sounds that he's doing all this to them, they are living. Apart from what this plan, just bear in mind, they would all be dead. It's amazing. I mean, I think we would be glad to know if some famine struck our entire country, that our government, unknown to us or even known to us, maybe some of us mocked it, thought it was kind of silly or something like, but the government had these vast storehouses, and you could go and buy grain, and there was nowhere else you could get it. But our government had thought of this and had planned ahead of time, and we could go get it from them. We'd be thankful that we lived in such a government, because all these other places, they can't get it. So this is the way it is. And so you give what you can. And you might wish that prices were cheaper maybe, but you're still thankful that it's there. It could be, I hadn't thought of this until just now, that the Canaanites stopped coming because maybe he stopped selling to the Canaanites, because as the supply continued to dwindle, with years left of need, he needed to continue to provide for the Egyptians and not worry about the others. I don't know. Maybe they turned people away in that sense. It's hard to say. Now, so he supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. Notice it says that year. So you trade all your livestock, and that's kind of the way it is. For that year, it was kind of a year of things were so bad for the whole year that people were coming routinely, giving their livestock in exchange for food. Verse 18. And when that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, we will not hide from my Lord that our money is all spent. The herds of livestock, they're all my Lord's. There's nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land. Now it was a doctrinal truth, a religious truth in Egypt at the time, that everyone and everything belonged to Pharaoh. But it's about to become a lived and experienced reality for these Egyptians. You are Pharaoh's, and so is your land. You literally, think of this famine came and wiped them out such that the whole nation literally has nothing. Everything is the property of Pharaoh. It's not that Egypt is emptied of money, it's that Pharaoh has it all. It's not that Egypt is emptied of food, it's that Pharaoh has it all. It's not that Egypt is emptied of livestock, it's that Pharaoh has it all. It's not that they don't have land that people can own, it's that Pharaoh now owns it all. And he's not selling. But for those Israelites, those guys, they've got their own land, they've got all the food they can have, they've got livestock growing like crazy, just continue to abound. What a thing. So they say again, verse 19, why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So the offer is, I think the offer is indentured, we will be your slaves for as long as the famine lasts, but we'll sell you our land for whatever agreement we make, I think is the idea. And so it might be permanent, the Egyptians become kind of permanent slave class in a sense, viewed that way under Pharaoh, but I think it's at least for some period of time, at least they are absolute servants, but they are in fact forever selling their land. So Joseph bought all the land, it says that first, right? And I think that's because of that. That's the first thing you do is sell your land. Then if you don't have land, then you think about selling yourself. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields, because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, and I think this is kind of step 2, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. And that's curious. The priests are kind of Pharaoh's advisors, and as his advisors, they're going to give it a kickback. They have their own land that doesn't get taxed, and it's theirs. But it's theirs by the good graces of Pharaoh. Right? And how do they live? Well, Pharaoh gives them an allowance. Gives them money every month or whatever. Now that's curious too, because in a sense, they're not They didn't sell themselves as servants, but they're already servants. I mean, the land they have because Pharaoh said they could have it, and the money they have because Pharaoh gives it to them. It's not much difference than anyone else. But they were kind of always allowed that honor because they were considered his advisors and these priests that help him in the work of governing. And so this is in some ways similar to the Israelites here. They were honored, they were given their own land, they were given a regular allowance for food and whatever they need. All this from Joseph, but Pharaoh's kind of given the nod that it's okay to do that. But it's all very tenuous, the whole situation here. So what else we read? Verse 22. Then Joseph said to the people, this is not be the priests, but to the people at large, the Egyptians, behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvests, plural, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own as seed for the field and as food for yourselves and your households, and as food for your little ones. And they said, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord. We will be servants to Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt. And it stands to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. There's a curious statement here, just that he gives them seed. He says, now plant that. And it's like, we're in a famine. The problem is we keep planting seed and nothing comes up. Or very little comes up, and we don't have enough to eat. We got to keep buying food. Don't give us seed and say, now, plant this, and then when it comes up, Pharaoh gets a fifth, and you guys get 4/5. It's like, this is kind of the dumbest thing ever. We've not been able to have a good harvest for a number of years now. Well, I think that indicates either this is the end of the famine, and Joseph knows it, but they do not. Or he gives them the seed for food, and he expects them, though, to plant some of it, not just to eat all this stuff, but to plant some of it. And when they plant it, even if there's another couple years of famine, to still give a fifth to Pharaoh and a 4/5 they keep, and the tax becomes something that happens right now. And then it becomes a statute. Look, because you sold the land, and because I gave you this one huge allotment of seed, this is the way it's going to be from now on. I saved your lives. You serve Pharaoh. The land is Pharaoh's. And so they are, even if their servitude towards Pharaoh when they sold themselves as slaves is only meant to last for like 10 years or a year or whatever, it's still in a sense permanent because now they have a new tax. Now all the land is Pharaoh's and they just work it, and Pharaoh charges them 20% of all the proceeds go to him. So in a sense, 20% of all that they do belongs to Pharaoh. And so they are, in that sense, his servants regardless. However all-inclusive their service was for a number of years, it will never end totally. They will always be paying tax to him. This 20%, Pharaoh has the fifth. And that's on top of whatever else was already existing. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. That's concerning the Egyptians. But we're surely meant to understand that the land that the Israelites lived on was not sold. It was given to them. We're told that just a few verses earlier, so we're not meant to forget that. So that's the situation. Under Joseph, Egypt, in one sense, has been saved. They've prospered as a nation more than any other nation around them. And yet, individual Egyptians, en masse, have lost everything because of the famine that God brought upon Egypt. And the Egyptians now have nothing. The only ones in Egypt who have anything are Pharaoh's household, the priests who serve Pharaoh, and Joseph and his relatives. That's it. Nobody else owns anything. Let's look at verse 27 then, this last section. Jacob prepares to die by fixing his descendants' gaze upon Canaan. I told you verse 27 is kind of an in-between verse, so let's look at that first. Thus, in this way, Israel, the nation, settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful, and multiplied greatly. And isn't that such a strange conclusion to what we just read about how Egypt was famished and just giving everything away just to survive? It says, now in this way, these guys gained possessions, they were fruitful, they multiplied greatly. The only explanation for that, I think, is the fact that they had this land, they had the allowance from Joseph, and they had these royal positions as stockmen, where it was just good for them. Business was good. Verse 28 now. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if now I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. He answered, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. And then we read on in the next chapter, but we won't go any further. So we read about the way that Israel, the nation, prospered. We come now to the end where Jacob has been there for 17 years. This has been going on. The time draws near that he must die. Now, I don't know what that feels like, but I feel like I've been around some people where they have known that it's time to die. They're not going to live much longer. They know it. I've also been around people who said, oh, I don't think I'm going to live much longer, and they lived a lot longer. And we could, in some sense, say Jacob was one of those guys. But now it's like, okay, this is different. He knows it's near. He feels it in his body. And he calls Joseph in. Only Joseph. Which is interesting because Joseph is not the... When I first thought of this, I thought, well, Joseph would be the one in charge, and he might be able... he's the one with enough clout to possibly get them freedom from their duties to go bury him, as he says, in the land of Canaan. Then I kind of had to temper that some, because you think about it, it's not just Joseph who's in charge of things now. These other men have positions of authority too. Not as much as Joseph, to be sure, they're not second in Egypt, but they've got some authority. They could probably work it out where they could leave. But of course, nobody could get a favor from Pharaoh like Joseph could. And so he calls in Joseph, I think for two reasons. One, Joseph's his most faithful, loved, and trusted son. And two, Joseph is the most likely to be able to carry it out. And he says to his son, think of this, if now I have found favor in your sight, if you're pleased with your father, if you love your dad, if there's a bond of affection between us, then do this for me. Put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Now that ought to recall for you another time where this happened, where Abraham made his servant put his hand under his thigh and swear that he would not take a bride for Isaac from among the Canaanites. Same kind of thing here. Put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Now, I'm thankful that when we strike a deal with people today, I don't have to put my hand under your thigh. I can just shake your hand and we can be good, right? Or, generally in the world that's not trusted either, I can draft a legal document, we can sign a covenant, and you can take me to court if I don't do it. But at least I don't have to put my hand under your thigh, right? It's kind of an odd thing, but it happened. Both men are kind of on their deathbeds, they believe, when this happens. And so it's a very intimate sort of a thing. And this is what happens. And so you promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Think of that. To say to your son, like, if you have any love for me at all, swear to me that you'll be kind to me. It's like, of course. Like, what do you mean? Obviously. Deal kindly and truly with me. And he says to him, then, do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. He sees it as a kindness. Like, it would son, I would count it a kindness to me if you would do this. But deal truly with me. Tell me what you'll do, right? Answer me honestly. But I'm asking you, like, just do this for me. Don't let me be buried here. I don't want it. My life's not here. God promised us that land. We're going to be going back there. I want to dwell there where the future of our people is. Let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out. I want to lie in my grave with them and stand with them for something, like for what God had done, for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be here together. This is what I want. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. And he answered, yeah, I'll do as you said. And he said, swear it. Swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. What a thing. I mean, you have 3 times. He says, put your hand under my thigh. And he says, and promise. And he does those things. And he says, no, swear it. Like, this is such a big deal to him. It's not to be changed or altered in any way. He wants to go back. And I think that as I labeled this heading, or gave a heading to this section, that is, he prepares to die by fixing his descendants' gaze upon Canaan. He wants them to be thinking of Canaan and not of Egypt. He doesn't want, things are really comfortable now, but he doesn't want them to be comfortable in Egypt. He wants them to remember the things that they said when they got here. We're just sojourning. This isn't our home. We're here for a while. We're going to be going back. He wants them to think of that, and so he wants himself to be buried there. Joseph himself in later chapters will do the same thing. He'll tell them, take my bones, put them in a coffin, and when you leave this place, you take them with you. Very important. Kind of doing the same thing, reminding them as his dying testimony, we're going to be getting out of here. You need to not be thinking about this place, but about the land of Canaan. So then, Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. So what do we say in conclusion about all this chapter? Obviously the story isn't ended, but we've come to the end of this chapter anyway. One thing we ought to say just by way of practical application. We should be careful in the judgments we make about God's work. I don't mean that we can't know that the kind things God has in store for us, or we should be doubtful about the promises He's made, or when we see Him clearly work to preserve or to judge that we should not call it such. I just mean this. God seems to take the long view, and so should we. It would be easy for Jacob to have told his sons, like, things are really good here. Get comfortable, prosper, keep going. But no, it's like, no, there's 400 years from now, something's going to happen. We need to be thinking about that. Have it in our heads. It will affect the way we live now. I'll say it this way, though. Good things don't always remain that way. They had all these good things they gotten from Pharaoh. It's not going to last. Right? There's going to become a Pharaoh. Like, so the Egyptians, in the heart of the Egyptians is going to come this feeling that the Israelites are prospering in ways that they don't have a right to and they haven't earned. Meanwhile, us Egyptians aren't having quite so easy of a time of it, so we're not okay with that. In the heart of Pharaoh will come this feeling that, who are these guys? And why do these foreigners have this power? Joseph was a long time ago. We don't owe them anything. And quite frankly, there are some political reasons why we might not want to have them doing so well. So since they're in my service, let's give them some different jobs that they're not so used to and put them to work in other ways and make life a little harder for them. We don't need to be doing all that work. They can do it. And this is what happens in the early chapters of Exodus. And it gets worse and worse. Good things don't always remain that way. Don't think that the thing that is a blessing to you now will be in 10 years. It may not be. Things could be radically different. Bad things do not always remain that way. Right? Jacob lost Joseph. That was awful. But it ended up saving their whole family. Allowing them to prosper, gain many possessions. It turned about in the long run a family that was going to just make a wreck of all that God was doing. It was brought to repentance. And they healed before the command of God. What a thing. Our job is not necessarily to judge all these things, but to be faithful today, to be godly today, loving today, holy today. That's our role. You can need to look to the Lord. It's also, I think this text ought to cause us to marvel a bit at what God can do with His people. I mean, the fact that this group of 70 people came down here as a group, as a family, united in purpose, with love for one another. That was not that way 22 years prior. You never would have guessed. I mean, none of us reading those stories would have thought this is how it's going to end up. They're going to end up as a close-knit family, trusting God, looking to God, prospering in Egypt, entrusted with the riches of the land in Pharaoh's service. We never would have guessed that. And this is what God has done. He's worked repentance in their hearts and success in their lives. The other thing I think this chapter is a really good example of is something that Isaiah says in chapter 43. I'll just read there. 43 verses 3 through 4. You'll hear these words and they'll be familiar to you, to most of you anyway. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my eyes and honored, and I love you, I give men in return for you, peoples in exchange for your life. What an example this is. Like all the wealth of Egypt, taken from the Egyptians, given to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, here, give it to this family. It's amazing what happens. It's like Egypt is given in exchange for the Israelites. And it happens again in Exodus. It happens again. Egypt is given in exchange for the Israelites. It's amazing. God does this. The kinds of things God will do with and for His people are truly remarkable. As unlikely as it might seem, like you look at the promises of God and the futures He's promised us, it seems like, I don't know how we're going to get there. Well, He's going to come. He's going to make it happen in ways we don't expect. Like that's true for next year, and it's true for 10,000 years from now. Like you're going to marvel at what God can do and does do in and through and for His people. And this is just an example of that. I mean, what were the Israelites supposed to do with these records that Moses gave to them? But to stir their hearts and to gain confidence in the things that God had promised to do for them in their lives. So we ought to be doing the same. It's not just a history lesson. We learn something about God and the marvelous ways He can do the most unlikely of things to come make good on His promise. We see the way He gives nations in exchange for this small group, whole lands. I mean, the entire geopolitical nature of the world changed in these 14 years. All for the benefit of this promise He made to this pagan a few hundred years before named Abram. Well, he's got some descendants that God means to bless the world through and make them into a nation. As unlikely as it is, as this group of people will ever be anything, God's going to make it happen. It's wonderfully encouraging, beloved. Look what God has done. Well, that's all I have for today. Are there questions or comments on the contents of this chapter?